thanks a lot, first of all, to you, for joining our session today and spending the next 45 minutes to talk or learn about DevOps with SAP. My name is Boris, so I'm a product manager at SAP, where I'm in charge of the DevOps story, especially around SAP Business Technology Platform. But I'm also forging the overall DevOps story of SAP together with a lot of colleagues. And I'm very happy to have my colleague Dimitar with me today, who will later on outline aspects around operation aspects. And the idea of our session is not only to outline how you can apply DevOps principles in SAP projects, but of course, as it's part of an SAP ALM Summit, of course, we also want to outline how we integrate into application lifecycle management offerings so that you can get all the different aspects together in your known environments then with that. Okay, let's start. As mentioned before, we have 45 minutes. I hope we will have some minutes at the end for Q&A. You can also come up, of course, with questions in the chat. And otherwise, we have also the Meet the Expert session later on today. First, I will start with a very short disclaimer because there will also be some forward-looking statements as part of the session. But nothing too spectacular there. You also might know already our hashtag ALM Summit. So if you want to spread the word, you can use that one and social media channels then accordingly. I've mentioned that we have the Q&A functionality of Zoom, so you can come up there with questions. Please really use the Q&A section, not the chat section, because that's much more convenient to provide answers then accordingly. And if time allows, you can also raise your hand and at the end, and you can also unmute then and come up with questions directly, or bring your questions then to the Meet the Expert session later on today. Okay, enough of the introductory part. Now let's start with the topic. And I just want to outline what it is all about. And for that, let me start with a very brief example. In the past, with classical approaches, we do pile up changes into larger releases that then get delivered maybe 2 times a year, something like that, when you think of former times of SAP NetWeaver, for example. What does that mean? That means you're investing into coming up with a new increment, meaning development, which does not reach your end user since several weeks or even months, right? And that means you're spending efforts that do not result in any benefit for your end user. So that's some kind of lost effort in that sense. Also, you're piling up complexity with those changes because there are more and more interdependencies to consider when then actually releasing. So releasing can be quite complex and hard. And the new approach is now to come up with a much more agile approach where you have much smaller changes that get deployed to production much more frequently. With that, you invest into increments where your end user can directly benefit from, and releasing is much easier because you do it much more frequently, and there are much less interdependency to handle for each single release than in the end. Why do we do that? Of course, in the end, we all want to have happier customers, right? That's true for SAP, of course, but it's also true for you if you come up with applications, for example, for your lines of businesses, right? And how can we achieve that? Of course, by providing better software, meaning reacting fast on feedback. And the baseline for that is that we come up with faster deployment, and it can only work out if you have quality built in. Otherwise, this will all end in a huge mess. So that's very simple, the overall approach we want to take. And how can we now achieve this faster deployment with quality built in? For that, let's briefly take a look at the deployment pipeline, where you normally come up with a requirement, then implement it, perform builds, integrate, perform tests, release it to production, deploy it, and then operate it. And with that, close the feedback loop, because then it's getting used and you can react on the feedback you receive. The idea now of our approach is that we want to automate large parts of this deployment pipeline by using a continuous integration server, where pipeline is triggered whenever you come up with development changes. And this pipeline then performs those automated steps, meaning the builds, the automated tests, and provides that feedback directly. If you now want to apply this concept, especially for SAP scenarios, I will now depict a simple example landscape and outline what you have to consider to really set the boundary conditions, then to apply those DevOps principles for corresponding projects. For that, we have here depicted a hybrid application, meaning we have SAP Business Technology Platform to the left and on-premise backend systems to the right, like SAP S/4HANA running in your data center or in the SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud or on other providers. The first thing is, of course, you have to set up some kind of pipeline. Here, that example, I've depicted our SAP Continuous Integration and Delivery Service. It's a pipeline as a service offering, very simple to use and set up, but we are also open here. So that could also mean you could use an open source or third-party offering that might already be in place. For on-prem, and yes, also here we want to enable a more agile approach also for ABAP on-premise development. You also need some kind of enablement, and that's something I will outline. That's the Git-enabled change and transport system. We will talk about it in a few minutes so that you understand what options you have there as well. The next one is then to use that environment, meaning development. For that, we are also open. I mean, I've depicted here for the Business Technology Platform, the Business Application Studio, but you could also use Visual Studio Code or Eclipse. So we are also very open and flexible there. For on-prem, it's rather straightforward. There you use standard classical approaches, like, for example, typical development systems. Then you come up with a release candidate that gets qualified by the automated pipeline, and then you will propagate towards your production environment. Of course, that's something you can do automated as part of the pipeline, or as depicted here with more control, with a handover into transport and also change management. And that's something we will also outline in more detail in the later part, because that's also, of course, key if you're applying application lifecycle management processes, then that might be an option you want to consider to also use those also for those hybrid scenarios then in the end. And on-prem, that is covered also by the change in transport system. We will also discuss it briefly in a few minutes. And then you operate your application in the end. I mean, for the platform, we do provide means here as well, where you see, okay, what is going on with your application and get notified if something should occur, and can also automate recurring operation tasks. Nevertheless, and that's of course, what we also want to stress, on top of the whole scenario, we still have our application lifecycle management capabilities, like being provided by SAP Solution Manager, SAP Focused Run, and SAP Cloud ALM. And here again, it's key that we also integrate the different aspects there, so that there you have the really holistic end-to-end view and have the full control over the overall scenario then in the end. And that's now what we want to break down in the remaining half an hour, something like that, and give you more insights where we do integrate and how you can set it up accordingly. Those 4 steps break down to our portfolio of DevOps service around SAP, which we have structured according to building blocks of the bridge we want to build between development and operations, being 2 of the key representatives of the cross-functional team we want to come up with DevOps. Of course, DevOps is a cultural approach rather, where we have to come up with common goals for the different team members that contribute to the success of an application. Nevertheless, here we want to focus really on the boundary conditions, how we can support you to really set up corresponding environments that allow you to apply those principles for SAP scenarios. And the first phase here is the planned setup phase, meaning, for example, if you have really a hybrid scenario, you think about how you can handle cloud artifacts, if that should be new to you. Here we provide, for example, guidance in form of best practices. We have a best practice guide for SAP Business Technology Platform, which is a very good starting point, a very good first read to understand how you can use cloud software for SAP scenarios, especially, and how that integrates into existing approaches as well. But the main part, of course, is to enable this automated continuous integration and delivery pipeline. And here I already mentioned that also for ABAP on-prem, we think that is really something you should consider, because that allows you, first of all, to share source code also via a Git server. Git is a source code repository, an external one, which you can use. It can also be cloud-based, for example. And with that, you also get enabled to automate the development processes via pipelines, also for your ABAP on-premise changes, meaning you can also benefit then from automated tests that get automatically triggered whenever you come up with changes. And in the end, with that, we are bringing ABAP on the same level like other languages, right? I mean, from our point of view, there was no reason to say, okay, ABAP has to stand out there. No, I mean, there's no reason for that. And with that, we see it on the same level with other languages and other approaches that also follow that and benefit from those more agile concepts then in the end. The baseline for that is that we have enhanced our change and transport system, which is part of the ABAP server since ages, right? So that it can also work with a Git server. And that's what this Git-enabled change and transport system, or GCTS, stands for. In the end, you have the same basic principles underneath, but you get more flexibility with that. What use cases we want to address with that for ABAP on-premise? First of all, of course, we want to benefit also from this continuous integration pipeline, meaning only successfully tested changes get deployed towards production, for example. Then we want to enable also distributed development, where you might have teams distributed via different locations, for example, and allow them to work together on one project in one system. And then we also want to enable branch-based development, meaning nowadays you have different landscapes for maintenance development and for feature development. And here you could really have one landscape and then only select which branch is the active one and work on that. Either it's for maintenance or it's for new feature development then in the end. And that also has of course, much benefits here for our on-premise development. In terms of development process, that is rather straightforward. I mean, your development teams, they still stick to the same development tools like, ABAP development toolkits, SE80, SPro, SE09, like for transport handling, for customizing and so on, meaning they create a customer transport, come up with the changes, and then release the transport request. So not much changes from that point of view. Nevertheless, that then leads to that the changes will be pushed into the central source code repository, meaning the Git server, which then can trigger this continuous integration server, where, for example, the automated test cases come and the feedback is provided to the development teams. And they can react on that, right, out of the context. So that's really something new. And you can get also a lot of possibilities with those automated tests. For example, you can verify compliance or check for vulnerabilities. So also security aspects can come in here quite easily as part of the process then. And when everything is fine, then the changes will be merged into the release branch, again on Git, and then an automatic pull of the changes to the follow-on systems. And finally, you can import then the changes into the ABAP runtime. So that's the whole process. And I mean, of course, there we are constantly improving that. So there's a blog post on the latest improvements of the Git-enabled change transport system for SAP S/4HANA here with the latest release. And one of the major improvements here has been that we came up with some kind of registry, meaning you can define to which repository each single object should be associated. And whenever you come up with a change, then that will be handled via direct different repositories. And also, we still enable to use Git-enabled change and transport system in parallel to the classical CTS change and transport system, meaning you can come up with first projects and try out this new approach with GCTS while still sticking to the established processes for all the other objects inside the same system. That's, of course, one major benefit we see. They can really gain some experience and then build up knowledge with first projects and proof of concepts there. In terms of integration, we have the integration also of Git-enabled change and transport into the change management capabilities of SAP Solution Manager. Here in the name of the change request management, which is part of SAP Solution Manager, and we have established this integration with Solution Manager 7.2 SPS 12, which just allows you to use change request management and to also track the transports and tasks and commits with change documents and triggering the deployment into the ABAP system also for those objects handled via Git-enabled change and transport system. So far for the enablement for on-prem, and now about our offerings to really ease using setting up continuous integration and continuous delivery. And here we have a twofold approach because we saw the need from our customer base to have two types of approaches. The one is very simple, where we say, okay, many of our customers are new to the concept and rather want to benefit from the approach without investing too much time and efforts into setting up a corresponding environments. So the very simple approach is this pipeline as a service offering, this SAP Continuous Integration and Delivery Service, which is offered as part of SAP Business Technology Platform, meaning you go to the service, subscribe to it, and then you can set up a running pipeline almost out of the box, meaning you specify your repository, and then you select a pipeline template for common SAP use cases like building an Fiori application or coming up with a cloud application programming model application, which is our goal path to come up with extensions running on business technology platform. And we are constantly extending the coverage there. So recently we also came up with a pipeline for integration suite content, and also planning to come up with further scenarios around developing applications that then run on an ABAP front-end server, for example. Again, the advantage here is really you do not have to come up with an own infrastructure. You have to build up and also operate later on. Instead, you have that pipeline as a service offering, no own infrastructure required, no in-depth CI/CD knowledge required, but you can directly benefit from the approach. Still, of course, it's not that flexible. I mean, we have included some configuration capabilities and are extending that, but for the time being, I mean, we have the set of scenarios. If you should need more flexibility or should already have an own infrastructure in place, maybe from non-SAP environments, we also want to have you covered. There with the more flexible approach where we say, okay, we have the so-called Project Piper. It's an open source approach where, first of all, we inside SAP came up with the demand saying, okay, we have to onboard more and more teams to that more agile approach. Let's derive some really tangible best practices for them to have an easy start there. And then, of course, extended that so that also our partners and customers can benefit from that. What does it offer? Okay, it's complemented also by a best practice guide, meaning a description that outlines how you can apply CI/CD for SAP scenarios. It's also a very good first read because that just explains also the basic principles there that can be new for some of you. So Project Piper, what does it bring? The most common offering is also, again, pipeline templates you can directly download from GitHub. I mean, we have only 2 templates nowadays. One is for ABAP environment. That's the SAP Business Technology Platform ABAP environment. The other one is a general purpose pipeline. We had other templates in the past, but then realized, okay, in the end, it does make more sense to have that more generic general purpose pipeline as starting point for all those scenarios as well. And on top of that, we have a library of pipeline steps you can use and then adapt or extend the templates then in the end. Also, we are working, or we are still working on migrating those pipeline steps towards Golang. That's a new language, or that's a language from Google. So far, we had a clear focus on Jenkins infrastructure because at the time we came up with the approach, we considered that to be some kind of de facto standard. But of course, now things changed. I mean, we have Azure DevOps, we have GitLab, we have a lot of different approaches, right? And with the new, with the migration of the pipeline steps, you are able to use those also in other environments, meaning non-Jenkins environments. And that's, of course, also a major benefit here. That is complemented by typical scenarios, meaning end-to-end descriptions of typical use cases. And here we again have also the integration with application lifecycle management. So for example, here is also an example, a scenario for building and deploying a hybrid application with SAP Solution Manager. Again, provides the end-to-end view with a lot of examples, and you can reuse large parts then of those scenarios if you want to start in a similar direction. And finally, we have containerized tools, meaning Docker images you can again download directly from GitHub. And for example, use then certain parts inside, for example, an Azure DevOps pipeline, for which we also do provide corresponding documentation then accordingly. So we have you covered if you need more flexibility, or we have that very low entry barrier if you want to gain first benefits without caring too much about the actual infrastructure then. That environment is then used in the next phase, in the development and test phase, where your development teams then use that infrastructure, meaning they come up with changes that are then pushed into the central repository, like for example GitHub. And this then triggers the continuous integration server, like for example, the SAP continuous integration and delivery service, or an own infrastructure being set up with Project Piper. And that pipeline then performs this automated building, testing, and packaging, and provides the direct feedback. And that's, of course, the first benefit, meaning development comes up with changes and gets direct feedback on the quality of the change. Are there some issues with any of the automated tests, meaning unit tests or compliance tests or whatever, right? And that's, of course, already something where development can react out of the context on the feedback they receive immediately after they have submitted the changes. And that's a different way of working, because with that, you make sure that you always have some kind of running increment then, or are working on that. And yeah, that's of course also opening up the door for a much more agile approach in the end. And yeah, you can really bring in quality in here, and also security aspects much more easier and much earlier in the overall process. And of course, key part here is that you have a good test coverage. We will spend some words on how we support you there as well. But normally that's not something you can come up overnight. I mean, that's just the fact for this overall more cultural-based DevOps approach. It's not something that you can buy and then just switch on and you're done. But yeah, you have to really change overall thinking of management and development teams as well, gain first experience and exchange overall. And here, my recommendation is to start looking into test-driven development, for example, where you start really with test cases, right, when coming up with the requirement already, that are then used throughout the whole development process. And also you will have first use cases where you come up with a certain coverage of test cases, and then gain experience on how much they really reflect the quality of the increment. And then you will by time just learn, okay, there was an issue later on, how do we have to improve our test cases to make sure they do not show up again, or we do identify them earlier. So that's the whole approach in principle. But when you have confidence that actually the test cases do reflect really the quality of the increment, you can then of course think about how to propagate that towards the production runtime then in the end. Yeah, for the test cases, here I just want to point out some of the stuff you might have already heard in the previous days as part of the SAP ALM Summit here. So we have you covered also around application lifecycle management. So for example, SAP Solution Manager, there we have the test suite and focused build as well. That does provide a lot of capabilities to test and then yeah, also check what has to be tested and so on. So that is in place here. Then we have also SAP Cloud ALM capabilities around test management, where you can also, for example, or it's planned to also be able to integrate cloud-based automation providers then in the end, and also come up with a controlled test approach then for your overall scenarios. And finally, we have also our partnerships, such as with Tricentis, which also allows you to really use a lot of test management and test automation capabilities for SAP scenarios and also for non-SAP scenarios for which they offer an additional offering on top of that if that should be required. There have been several deep dives in the implementation subtrack, 2 sessions yesterday on test automation with Tricentis. And today, there's also a session where a customer tells about his experience with SAP S/4HANA with Tricentis test automation and SAP Solution Manager. So a lot of content to find around this event here, around the topic to get you started there as well. Okay, yeah, I already mentioned it. I mean, the development teams comes up with this qualified release candidate, which is then to be propagated towards production in the deliver and change phase. As mentioned before, you can do that highly automated, meaning, okay, I say I have my automated pipeline. Whenever the tests are green, then I want to have that automatically forwarded then to the runtime environment as well, which is a valid approach for end-user-centric applications, and a lot of companies out there in the market are famous for coming up with those changes in a very agile way, or highly automated. Nevertheless, of course, I mean, and for that, again, you can use continuous integration delivery service or open source and third-party offerings with Project Piper. But in enterprise environments, what I wanted to mention is we are all on the same page for sure that there are situations where you have more strict boundary conditions, right? And with that, that's why we also want to offer the integration into transport and change management. They can apply a standardized enterprise-ready change management process. Also have transparency on the audit trail of changes, meaning, okay, who performed now which change in which production sub-account and when. Also, you can establish some kind of separation of concerns, which first of all might sound like a contradiction to DevOps, but here really the idea is that you have the control and sometimes also need the control. For example, if you have a location-based strategy with several sub-accounts in different locations, sometimes you will face the requirement that you have to define who's allowed to perform changes in which production sub-account, if that production sub-account is running in a different country, for example. And finally, you also get the option to synchronize cloud changes with on-premise changes for hybrid scenarios. How does that now look like in terms of concept? So the concept is really that you have a development landscape based on this continuous integration principles, meaning with the goal to verify single developer changes and typically fully automated with the pipelines. But as soon as you came up with this qualified release candidate, you have then that automated handover from the pipeline into a delivery landscape, then based on strict transport management rules like policies, schedules, when is it allowed, by whom is it allowed, typically with the goal to verify the release candidate version, and typically also done with manual confirmation, meaning you have some kind of delivery or release manager that says, okay, I've now checked the results and I now confirm that this change can now be propagated into this production sub-account, and this information shall also be stored inside the system for auditing reasons. That's the whole concept here. Of course, not required for all scenarios, but if you should have those more strict boundary conditions in place, we have you covered here with that approach then. Also in terms of setting that up, I already mentioned the left side with CI/CD, where you have the pipeline as service offering and Project Piper. We have that automated handover as part of the continuous integration, the delivery service, meaning that the release stage has just an option to just say, okay, please just trigger transport into our transport service there. And we have on the right 2 options. One is a on-premise option with the enhanced change and transport system, and one is the cloud transport management service. Then on-premise system means, some of you might already use change and transport system, which we have also extended to handle non-ABAP objects in the past. And there you just have a logical representation in your on-premise ABAP system of also the SAP Business Technology Platform sub-accounts, like a dev test prod, and then corresponding changes trigger a transport inside your on-premise CTS Plus system, and you handle the propagation of the changes there. Communication happens via the cloud connector. This is in place for so-called multi-target application archives, meaning development artifacts you handle on the business technology platform. MTA is our approach to handle interdependencies of cloud applications, where we put all the different artifacts an application consists on into one archive together with technical descriptions of the contents. And that just allows the business technology platform deployment infrastructure to take such an archive and then automatically deploy the different modules into the right target runtimes in the right order, and making sure that the technical prerequisites are fulfilled. And that's just a baseline for an automated deployment in the end. On top of that, we are also offering a cloud service. Of course, it's a little bit simpler to use. We have their wizard to set it up. It's much more convenient to use. You do not need an ABAP on-prem system. And also we are covering not only the MTA-based contents, but also application-specific content types. Just to give you an example, I mean, for cloud integration or API management or business rules, they also come up with application-specific content types. And here we just want to allow you to handle those centrally as well. Of course, they all have local means like export, import, but here you would have the option to have one centralized approach in a more controlled way if you want to have that, right? And it's also some kind of central service, meaning you set it up once and then you can handle transports between Neo sub-accounts, between Cloud Foundry sub-accounts. You can also handle transports across global account boundaries. So it's really some kind of central service. And you have full control, meaning you can really configure who's allowed to come up with changes in which sub-account and who's allowed to handle them in which target sub-account. We have a lot of integration. I mean, I mentioned integration with CI/CD. We have also open APIs, and it's available via free tier and trial, pay-as-you-go, cloud credits, and SAP Store. Both approaches then have that option to integrate into change management, where you can have that then that hybrid handling, meaning you have your changes in on-prem and in the cloud, meaning business technology platform, and then you come up with clusters, meaning dev, test, prod clusters, and then handle the changes not separately, but synchronized across those clusters, where you just make sure that the change does reach the production sub-account, also in line with the enablement of the backend. And yeah, we already talked about it. I mean, here we have the integration both for CTS, CTS Plus, and also the SAP Cloud Transport Management Service as outlined here. And also when we take a look forward, I mean, also SAP Cloud ALM wants to come up with change management and deployment orchestration capabilities. Here the baseline will be for on-prem CTS, and for the cloud stuff, the SAP Cloud Transport Management Service. And here you see also the vision that we also want to enable not only business technology platform, but also cloud artifacts from our SAP Cloud solutions. So the whole picture looks as follows. CTS is there and will stay there for on-prem, with the remark that we have also GCTS in place now as an additional option. CTS Plus can also handle MTA-based artifacts of BTP. So if you know you only want to use those, you can stick to that. Otherwise, our way forward is the Cloud Transport Management Service for the cloud changes. There you have the option also to interplay with the CI/CD pipelines for that more agile approach, and both sides then integrate into change management and quality gate management on SAP Solution Manager today, and in the future also with SAP Cloud ALM, where you then have the complete centralized control in that sense. Okay, now we have come up with the change, propagated towards production. Now it's about providing the application with the right performance and availability. And for that, I will now hand over to Dimitar. Dimitar, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll share my screen, and we will dive in those aspects of that monitoring operations of your cloud workloads. So to do this, we'll look at a rather common and simple scenario with the SAP BTP. So we would have some code running. We would have two microservices which consume various backing services from the platform, maybe SAP HANA, maybe some hyperscale provided. And to help with the operations of such workloads, especially with the alerting, the observing of what's going on with our runtimes and our active operations, we will introduce two services, alert notification service and the automation pilot. The alert notification service, as the name suggests, is a service which is sourcing events from SAP BTP, it's filtering them, and it can dispatch them to various channels. And the automation pilot is a low-code engine orchestrating various DevOps tasks, like reacting to such alerts like plant maintenance or anything which is done manually to operate on your cloud workloads, and you would like to have it automated. Let's dive a bit deeper with an example of how those interact within BTP. So let's say we have an issue. We have some incident, we have some change of state, and an event is generated for our applications. Let's say the application crashes or some metric breaches a threshold, like the disk space, CPU, or anything related to our application. Then the authentication service would pick up an event, and it could be configured so this event would be of interest, and it could be delivered to different channels. So the operators of your solution would know that something is going on with their workload. So this could be delivered to some collaboration tools like chats, email, of course, issue tracking systems like Jira, ServiceNow, etc. Simultaneously, the authentication service can deliver that notification to an automation tool like the automation pilot, which in turn can immediately react to that notification and could apply recovery measures, could apply remediations on those workloads in an effort to automatically resolve the issue. And of course, the automation pilot can use the authentication service to report on those applications and to notify the team that everything is fine or the problem persists. When talking about our integrations, that scenario, this is of course not only limited to SAP BTP. All those alerts delivered with the authentication service can be consumed with in the exception management capabilities, exception monitoring capabilities of Solution Manager, Focusrun, and SAP Cloud ALM. So let's dive a bit deeper in the capabilities of those services, starting with the authentication service. What events actually can deliver? The authentication service is sourcing events from the BTP runtimes. It's sourcing events from the new environment, from the monitoring of the new environment, from the Cloud Foundry environment, but also it's sourcing alerts from the various services in BTP. So, for instance, there is a very rich catalog for events coming from SAP HANA Cloud. We have mechanisms for extracting events from the platform integration service, for instance, the success rate of the iFlows, from mobile services, transport management, mentioned by Boris before, MTA deployment, etc., etc. So all those alerts, they get firehosted in the alert notification service, and you can configure filters and the configurations what to do with those you're actually interested in. And then you can pick options to deliver them to incident management like VictorOps, Jira, ServiceNow, collaboration tools like MS Teams, Slack, generic webhooks, or even you can trigger automatic reactions of those using workflow service or the automation pilot, as mentioned before. And let's dive in a bit deeper on what the automation pilot is. It's a low-code execution engine with which you can model technical tasks and you can execute them in an automated way. So the automation pilot provides a very rich catalog of built-in commands, which can be chained or composed and configured, of course, with additional custom scripting if required, of course, only if required, in order to achieve your operational automation. So that catalog covers commands for new Cloud Foundry environment, for operating with Kubernetes clusters and resources. For, of course, you can add custom scripting if you like. There are commands for managing the lifecycle management of HANA databases, triggering Jenkins jobs, generic HTTP calls, and that catalog, of course, is expected to grow. So you would be able to compose various scenarios and more powerful capabilities without actually writing any code. And looking at those services, of course, we are at the ALM Summit. Let's see how they integrate. How do we have a common story of operations of SAP workloads? And of course, sorry, for some reason, this one stopped working. So here they are. So both of those services, the authentication service and the automation pilot, they're integrated in SAP Cloud ALM. All the alerts from the alert notification service you can consume in SAP Cloud ALM. And in the intelligent event processing capabilities, you can match those and work with them as for the other events you have in SAP Cloud ALM. And one of those capabilities is to react to alerts, basically operation flows. Currently, we had only workflow and IRPA capabilities in the operational automation capabilities of SAP Cloud ALM. Now there is a new entry available. You can model automation pilot commands to be registered and triggered from SAP Cloud ALM operational automation and leverage all those powerful capabilities from the workflows and flows you already have. Looking at how this is delivered. So let's zoom in the intelligent event processing. Here you can define an event processing rule. You can select the sub BTP event. This would mean all those events which can be consumed with the alert notification service are available in Cloud ALM. And here you have all those fields of the events for the resources they're originating, for their content, the event, actual event types, the services in landscape management from which those events are coming. And you can pinpoint the exact events you're interested in. And looking at the automation pilot, this is the operation flow screen, and here you can very easily just register any command you have already available in your automation pilot instance. So in a nutshell, the SAP alert notification service and automation pilot, they're integrated in SAP Cloud ALM for operations. And with this, you get the benefits of handling PTV events in SAP Cloud ALM, such as events for the new application monitoring, Cloud Foundry runtimes, backing services, etc. And you have the powerful capabilities of triggering your own customized automation pilot commands from SAP Cloud ALM automation flows. So with this, we can proceed with the summary to our whole session.
Many thanks, guys. We got a couple of questions already.
Right. I tried to answer some of them already in the chat, right? Maybe I just wrap it up, Hendrik, if that is okay, and then.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah.
I also saw that a lot of questions came up, especially also around focus build and so on. So those might be very good candidates for the Meet the Expert session later on, to be honest. But let's see. Just to wrap it up. I mean, I hope you have seen, that we are covering here really offerings along the complete life cycle, from setting up the environment to using it via the development phase with automated test cases, then for the delivery towards production, to then operate as outlined by Dimitar. On top of that, we are also working on having some kind of integrated DevOps management, which is planned to be a central entry point where all the different aspects along the complete life cycle shall come together, like also KPIs of the pipeline and SLAs and so on. Those services then, in the end, they are available today already, and also a lot of best practices. When we now take a look how all comes together, and that's also some kind of vision, because it also shall show the direction we want to go to. We have the enablement for on-prem with GCTS, and there was also a question that is true. Right now that's only available for SAP S/4HANA. There are third-party open source offerings, ABAP Git for SAP ERP, but this GCTS is technically only enabled right now for SAP S/4HANA. We have the DevOps services from the Business Technology Platform on top that we have mentioned throughout the session. Both work together with third-party and open source, like GitHub, Jenkins for CI/CD, and then source code management, of course. Both handle the propagations toward production. Then we have also the vision that we are covering all different aspects from the different services from Business Technology Platform, meaning for scenarios, for CI/CD, handling transport artifacts for more and more of those service types, handling alerts and providing automation commands for reasonable use cases along those different scenarios. We have those open APIs, meaning we are open to integrate also in other approaches. And yeah, we have that integration into the application lifecycle management capabilities. And in the long run, we also want to support all the different SAP software as a service solutions. There was also similar questions concerning CI/CD. I mean, of course, it depends a little bit on if you now want to have an extension that is running then on business technology platform, like on SAP SuccessFactors, where we have the corresponding registration capabilities and so on. And with that, you can then apply those more agile approaches along with that one. We also want to handle more and more cloud transport mechanisms. Of course, there are local capabilities then for the solutions themselves. But if you want to have a centralized approach, that's something we also want to enable for you. That is the overall vision that we want to follow. And yeah, if you want to now make first steps, I hear a lot of information. I mean, first of all, on DevOps in general. So, for example, we also have an open SAP course in place. We have information for Git-enabled change in transport system. There, we are also working on an open SAP course that is planned to be offered next year. We have information for CI/CD DevOps with business technology platform. We have a webcast series. We have an upcoming TechEd session where you see also a demo scenario end-to-end along the complete life cycle with the pipeline and transport and operations then as well. And you can try those services out. So we are part of the free tier and the trial environment, meaning without charges. And we have also missions and discovery center content for you and tutorials. And yeah, we have also a continuous inference session. So yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah, we are already running short of time. I mean, you came up with some of the questions already. I also want to stress that you have the Meet the Expert session later on, and you also get our contact information. So DevOps is always about sharing, exchanging, right? And we are really on the journey together. So really feel free to reach out to me or Dimitar afterwards if we could not answer all your questions, or if you take a look at on your own later on or discuss it with your colleagues and some further questions should come up, do not hesitate. We are really keen on staying in contact with you, because also for us, it's important that we know where we have to improve, where you need more information or more guidance from the end. Yeah, maybe we can, Hendrik, I'm not sure if time allows to have one or two more questions now, or
I just answered to the questions that we take them to the Meet the Expert, probably, okay. Because especially for Focus Build, I have also to involve somebody else from the Focus Build team. So I think because of time reasons, I think we are good right now, and we should. I think there seems to be a lot of interest for the topics. So let's have later at 2 p.m. Is it then to discuss the open question regarding continuous improvement, development, and so on.
I would be very happy to have welcome you there as well. And thanks a lot, really, for spending the last 50 minutes almost now with us. Really appreciate it. Yeah, talk to you later. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the event and have a great weekend, everyone, and stay safe. Thanks a lot.